Hello folks, and I hope you're having just a great day today and staying safe in our COVID world. Today I want to do something a little different. Normally for this channel I do reviews for you, but today what I want to do is take a look at the two major reasons why people read. They read either for entertainment or they read for education. I want to take a look at those sort of two different styles of reading, what people read as a result, and so forth. Take a look at my own reading, where I've grown, and that sort of thing, and moved as a writer of genre fiction in particular, but other styles of writing too. And so I want to kind of do that for you, unpack that for you, and so forth. Now, the foundation for today's video is the essay Epic Pooh by Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock wrote this essay, I believe, early on in the 70s, and he's gone back and revised it a couple of times. It's a critique against some popular genre work in the fantasy at the time, specifically C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, and J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series, and The Hobbit, wherein he basically says that these guys aren't as strong of a writer as you might think, particularly C.S. Lewis. He'll have quotes from the C.S. Lewis works, like from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that are hard to read, that have bad use of pronouns and that sort of thing. And he says, and he doesn't like the Merry England view that is kind of in line with that sort of Winnie the Pooh. And he says all they basically wind up being is sort of an epic version, an epic tale, an epic edition of Winnie the Pooh. And then he gives counterexamples, and he'll go back and edit this essay a couple of other times, including more recent counterexamples, such as the 7-book series that's set in our friend Wizard Harry Potter series, and the Wizarding World therein by J.K. Rowling. And he'll say, hey, here's a much better example. There's more words used. It's better for your kids to learn, and that sort of a thing. And he'll use that as one counterexample in the essay. So if you're interested in checking out, again, it's called Epic Pooh. Feel free to Google that and read it. And that was, again, the sort of informative layer that I'm using for this. I'm going in a different direction than he goes in, but this is still the same basic sort of idea of reading as escapism versus reading as education are going to be what I kind of drill down to and unpack for you. So while I do that for you, let me start by giving you sort of a tour of Abe as a reader, since Abe as a reviewer for in terms of the things that you're kind of reading about comes from, right? I'm giving you things that I've read, right? And so I'm going to give you kind of a tale. My first favorite writer that I ever had was after I read J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, and then I read his Lord of the Rings. So J.R.R. Tolkien is my first favorite writer of all time. The book, The Lord of the Rings, I consider it to be my first adult book. It took me an entire summer to read between 4th and 5th grade years. And I consider that sort of the maturation process, and tackling that big, giant, thick monstrosity. And I consider that, again, to be my sort of wake-up call in terms of the things that I was looking for, and sort of my adultening with the things that I was starting to read. And afterwards, I'd go back and I'd read more adult works and adult books and that sort of a thing after that. But that was sort of my journey. And it took me a long time to muscle my way through the entire trilogy. But I did, knocked it out, and I was grew up quite a bit as a reader. He was my first favorite writer. Then I encountered another writer when I was in high school named R.A. Salvatore. I read this book, this copy of this book, The Crystal Shard. When it was first published, I bought it like that month. And I did that with a lot of the early Forgotten Realms stuff because I was a big fan of Dungeons & Dragons at the time. And I like things like the Dragonlance series too by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, which I've talked about with you before. And R.A. Salvatore became my second favorite author. And when you took the library tour, you saw just how big my R.A. Salvatore collection is. Right here is just the ones that were published in the Dritz the Warden series. It's not even like the other ones. If you can take a look at the back, and I've got a whole other section of his works that were published outside of it, from the Demon Wars series to the Spear Wielder's Tale, and that sort of thing. Echoes of the Fourth Magic. And I've got a lot of The Witch's Daughter, a lot of his books that were published outside of the sort of TSR Forgotten Realms bend as well. He's also written some great books in the Star Wars series, in the X-Wing Squadron series. So the first one specifically. So he's written in a lot of different places. I even have his Tarzan book for the Tarzan the movie, which is not a very good take on Tarzan because, again, it was by my favorite writer. And one of the things I love about R.A. Salvatore, he first of all hit a hit. Basically what he did was he combined two archetypes in the genre with his character Drizzt Do'Urden. And it's a big hit and he sells a lot of copies, right? Drizzt Do'Urden is the ranger archetype of Aragorn from Middle-earth. And that ranger archetype in fantasy that's been heavily in fantasy since then, from gaming to movies to books to comics. The ranger archetype is a big part, sort of, of fantasy. And then he also combined it with sort of the Elric, the anti-hero, the good guy from the bad guy race who's going up against that, and so forth. So you have sort of a combination of Elric, of Melnimity, and Aragorn from Michael Moorcock and from J.R.R. Tolkien. That's kind of where he gets his Drizzt Do'Urden character from. It combines two major archetypes, and to my knowledge, nobody had done that before, so kudos to him. It's not the most inventive thing in the world. He's just taking two archetypes and combining it in one character. A brooding, good guy from an evil race, just like Drizzt Do'Urden would turn out to be. Also, his characterization changes. In the first couple of books, he's this happy-go-lucky elf. He becomes more brooding. He becomes more introverted over time. The character changes too, but be that as it may, he's a very strong way to escape. But nothing in R.A. Salvatore ever challenged me as a reader. I've never gone, man, I feel like I'm better as a person having read that. Like, I think I was challenged in a good way. Sure, there are some elements of racism and anti-racism in the Drizzt Do'Urden character, since he comes from an evil race and he's oftentimes judged because of the color of his skin and that sort of a thing. So there are some sort of racist and don't be a racist sort of allegories there to take away from it, but I never felt challenged by that, right? I never felt pushed. And I never felt I was a better person because I had read a Drizzt Do'Urden novel, right? But I loved him. I thought he was great at writing combat scenes. He was great at writing some detailed stuff. I never got bored when I was reading an R.A. Salvatore work. And again, still like him as a guy, right? He's still very influential on me as a person. And again, we've saw, as you've seen. But I have then moved and I evolved. And I started reading Michael Moorcock, who's, again, his epic poo kind of influenced this story. And particularly, for me, I've talked about this before, but in my reviews of his Hawkmoon stuff, I read his Hawkmoon stuff first, then I came to his Elric stuff second, and his Elric stuff really sold me. His Hawkmoon stuff was a great opener, but his Elric stuff really sold me to him as a writer. He's much more darker, he's much more stronger, and his writings actually do begin to challenge you, although not to the degree that some of the later writers that I've liked a lot have too. But then, sort of in my late high school career, like my senior year in high school, the first couple of years in college, Michael Moorcock had become my third favorite writer. So my first favorite writer is Tolkien, my second favorite writer is Salvatore, and my third favorite writer is Michael Moorcock, the writer of who wrote the Eternal Champion series. Okay, and then I encountered this guy, H.P. Lovecraft, who became my fourth favorite writer. H.P. Lovecraft will push you as a writer. When you read an H.P. Lovecraft story, you are challenged. You're challenged with your preconceived notice of what good and evil are. You're challenged with your preconceived notice that there are people out in the universe that actually do care about you, but not in his stories. Nobody's out to get you. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody cares about you. And these bad guys are so bad that calling them bad is an insult to them. They're so evil, they're so vile that they defy human concept and words. They are evil beyond the term evil, and they don't care about you at all. That's the only reason why you still exist. You are an ant to them, and if you get in their way, you start mussing up their house, they're going to kill you. They're going to kick down your ant stand. They're just going to move on, and that's all Earth is to them. It's this tiny little planet in a tiny little corner of the universe that has no value and nothing. And that is a new take on horror. It's a refreshing take on horror, and it's one that pushes you as a reader too, right? Even if I don't agree with it as a Christian, I do think some people are going to be there to help me out at the end, but still, nevertheless, I'm challenged as a reader when I go and I read a Lovecraft story, right? And that is very different. It was a very different experience. And so after I encountered him, and I bought this book on hope that the Del Rey publisher, who I was following for science fiction and fantasy, particularly it's fantasy stuff, was a publisher I had a lot of faith in. So I followed it into Lovecraft and this first republication of some of his best works, like The Rats in the Walls and stuff. And I encountered Lovecraft and I loved him. And he became my fourth favorite writer. And so what I want to do, again, is kind of compare Lovecraft and Salvatore for you. Because Salvatore is a reader that I think most people will read to escape. They're reading him for that first type of reading. They're reading it to get away from the difficulties. They're reading it to get away from the stresses of the day, of life. It is reading for entertainment, almost exclusively. Again, there are some anti-racist overtones that are in his Drizzt Do'Urden works that are not in some of his other works. So you're never going to get that from. You're never going to get anything from the Spearweaver Lord's Tale or something, or something like that, or the Crimson Shadow stuff, his trilogy, or The Witch's Daughter. But you are going to get that from his main work that that he's still writing to today, the New York Times bestseller series that's super popular and sold a whole lot. But again, it's not, you're never pushed as a writer, as a reader rather, you're never sort of pushed, you're never sort of challenged, your ideas are never sort of something that are put up for wholesale, right? But when you read Lovecraft, you are. Lovecraft pushes you as a reader, challenges you as a reader, your preconceived notions, your idea of what horror is supposed to be. It's not anything like the genre of horror, and yet it's better horror than you've read, right? It's a very different style of reading. It takes more of your time. It'll take you longer to read a Lovecraft page than a Salvatore page. I can go back and reread a Salvatore novel, and probably half the time it would take me to go back and reread, a Lovecraft novella like At the Mountains of Madness or something like that, right? And I have gone back and read Salvatore's stuff at least 2 or 3 times because I do enjoy the escapism and going back to my youth and rereading those. I do enjoy that. And each time I might go a little bit deeper. Like I recently bought the next trilogy of his works and I read those. And I'll probably do that again if I do that one more time in my life. So I do enjoy that sort of nostalgic head back to your childhood. But for the most part, I like to read things that challenge me, and that's why I prefer the classics. That's why I prefer older stuff. That's why I prefer reading things from the pulp era, reading things from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, reading things from the 1800s and earlier. That's why I love challenging myself as a reader. That's why I love reading famous works in other worlds and other genres, like even outside of the 3 genres that I love, like horror, science fiction, and fantasy. Like I love reading Romance of the Three Kingdoms because it's this giant Chinese myth and legend. I've loved reading the Nibelungenlied, Song for Roland, Song of the Cid. I've enjoyed reading these great strong sagas in other cultures that aren't mine. As an American, Americans are never required to read and know who the Cid is, but Spanish people are. He's a big part of Spanish culture, right? And so I enjoy sort of reading those. I've gone back and read the Kalevala. I've gone back and read the Nibelungenlied. I enjoy these sorts of ways of getting a stronger feel for the world, reading the classics in other cultures, and that sort of thing. Because when I read those, I'm learning. I'm not just reading. I'm not just escaping, but there's that second level. There's that reading for entertainment and reading for education. And that's what I really enjoy as an adult. And that's why this channel tends to be focused on. Now, there are going to be lots of these sort of pulp era escapism things that we've done. But again, I feel more educated for reading something that influenced the things today, right? The first Necromancer story, the first story with an undead empire in the Necromancer's kingdom. These earlier stories that were heavily influential in today, or forgotten things that we may have forgotten about that are great, that are perfectly suitable for escapism. And a lot of pulp era is good for escapism, and there's a lot of pulp era that's good for education because it's influenced today, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I love this channel. I love the things that I can do with this channel, and so forth. And that's kind of been my kind of experience. Now, I also think that one of the things you may see in sort of the difference between a Lovecraft and a Salvatore, it's also sort of the difference between a Hugo Award and a Nebula Award. If you're familiar with science fiction, then you'll know that there are 2 main awards that are given out. The Nebula is given out by the Science Fiction Writers of America. It's given out by people who know the craft of writing. So they give their awards to people that they think are the best writers, the best examples of writing that year. It's being acknowledged by your peers. It may not be the ones that sold the best, right? It may be somebody who went and had a different writing style, who had an avant-garde style of writing, and so forth. And then there are people whose works were not only resonant with the readership, but also with what they were doing and pushing it too. But again, if I push myself as a writer outside the normal bounds of writing, and I do something very different, very avant-garde, I might not get the readers. They may not follow me along with it, but my fellow writers will read it, and so forth. And Lovecraft was much more popular with his own writers, his fellow writers at the time, than he was with readers. Right? He was not nearly as well read as his contemporaries. His writing, but his writing style was something that was classic, and the reason why he survived is because his fellow writers kept his stuff around. They loved it so much they actually created a publishing house, Arkham Publishing, in order to republish his things, keep it alive for future generations, so that we would have an appreciation today for him. We would not be reading him today if he wasn't as popular with his own fellow writers as he wound up being. So we would not be reading him today. We would not know who he is today. He would be a lost person. Like lots of people from the pulp era have come lost to time. On the other hand, R.A. Salvatore, he's not a Nebula, he's a Hugo. He gets the fan awards. He sells a lot. He has great sales. He has got books that really kind of push escapism as well as combat scenes and that sort of thing, and the racist overtone that makes you feel good when you're reading it, even though you're not. It doesn't actually challenge your racism in any ways, but it makes you feel good when you're reading it after reading Drizzt Burke, and that sort of thing, right? He's more of the Nebula. He's going to be popular now. I don't think people are going to be reading R.A. Salvatore 100 years from now. They're still going to be reading Lovecraft, but they're not going to be reading Salvatore, I don't think, 100 years from now. I don't think genre fans are going to be just absolutely unpacking him. I think he's going to be a lost name to history. And I think that's kind of a good example of the difference between the two. I love them both. They've both been my favorite writer, either the second or fourth favorite writer. But I think one of them is very much in the sort of entertainment side of things, and the other one is more on sort of the education, challenges you, sort of things. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. What did you think of my video? Did you agree or disagree with any of the things that I talked about with you? I'm happy to talk with you more about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please feel encouraged to hit that subscribe button, because there's going to be so many more of these to follow. And finally, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and watching my video, because we all have so many things happening in our lives. So the fact that you spent this time with me, that is so humbling, and I really do appreciate that. Thanks again, and have a great day.